of Ukraine. And I'm honored to have been appointed a chairperson of this important ad hoc committee. And it is my pleasure to open the public part of the meeting in the presence of Mr. Tiny Cox, the President of the Assembly. First of all, can we agree that this meeting is public, live streamed, and recorded until 4:30 p.m.? I see no opposition. Let's start the recording now. Have we started? Following the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, the Assembly has expressed a strong political commitment to help the Ukrainian authorities and relevant stakeholders in other countries. In particular, PACE committed to act as a facilitator to find possible solutions to the safe return of deported children to their families and to provide assistance to member states hosting Ukrainian children. I wish that today it acts as a facilitator as well as that together we will take advantage of this committee as a real instrument to help Ukrainian children. As for the program, this morning we will discuss the access to education and health care for Ukrainian children displaced in Council of Europe member states and within Ukraine. This afternoon we will focus on the issue of deportations and forcible transfers of Ukrainian children by the Russian Federation and practical steps to bring these children back home. Dear colleagues, I believe that in close cooperation we will help Ukrainian children and prevent the violation of their rights. I'm glad that we are together on this path. Thank you for your attention. And I would like now to give the floor to the President of the Assembly, Mr. Tiny Cox.
Thank you very much, dear Olena, for having me here in this important conference on the situation and the future of the children of Ukraine. I think that we all are aware that when at the end of February 22, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine by crossing the borders of Ukraine, when that war started, from day one, it were amongst those of these millions of victims, the children of Ukraine were perhaps the main victims. Their life has changed ever since, and I'm worried a lot about what is happening to them and their future, what is happening to the children of Ukraine who are in Ukraine, who have become victims or could become victims and are in a way already victims, because a war is the main threat to every child, you could say. The children who had to leave Ukraine and are seeking shelter somewhere in one of the other member states, and the children that were forcefully kidnapped and brought to the territory of the enemy, which has been called a possible war crime by the International Criminal Court. I'm happy that we are able to discuss this issue, the actual situation, and what we can do in order to do as much as possible to help the children of Ukraine wherever they are. Also during the Reykjavik summit of heads of states and government in mid-May, our heads of state and government made it clear that the situation of children in Ukraine is amongst our highest priorities. And I'm happy that we did not only say that, but that we show that we really mean it. And this conference fits in that approach, I think. Main goal of this meeting is that we as an assembly always have expressed a strong political commitment to help the Ukrainian authorities and relevant stakeholders in other countries to take care of the children of Ukraine. I would wish that today our assembly and its ad hoc committee facilitates this process in two ways. One, to find solutions to the tracing and safe return of deported children to their families, a topic that we are going to discuss this afternoon. And secondly, to provide assistance to member states hosting Ukrainian children as regards, for example, access to healthcare and education, including within Ukraine itself. Sometimes I have this odd feeling that we say we are so happy that so many children have found shelter in one of our member states, and I am happy. But if a child has to leave his or her country and to go to a complete different circumstances, then the child is a victim, and whatever we do, we cannot forget that they are victims. This idea we are taking care of them, so well done. That's not good. We should put our emphasis to these children who are living in my country, in the Netherlands, and in many other countries. And I'm grateful that we are doing our best. But to do your best does not mean that we solve a problem. Therefore, it's important that we discuss this issue today very intensely. The discussion this morning will, as said, be on the focus on the access to education and healthcare of Ukrainian children displaced or refugees in the Council of Europe member states, several of them being also EU member states, and within Ukraine. The question of health is, in my humble opinion, of utmost importance. The war in Ukraine has exposed hundreds of thousands of children in the country to traumatic events that put them all at risk of long-term mental health problems in addition to physical injuries. This problem concerns practically all children, I think, of Ukraine, those who have fled the war, those who are internally displaced, or those who have stayed in their homes and still are under attack or could come under attack. Access to education is the other issue that we should concentrate on, not only in host countries, but also, again, in Ukraine. According to a report of Human Rights Watch, since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, nearly 4,000 educational facilities throughout the country have been damaged or destroyed. 4,000, putting the future of Ukraine's children at risk. Most damage to schools and other educational facilities resulted from aerial attacks, artillery shelling, rocket strikes, or the use of cluster munitions. When I say it, it's so hard to imagine that this happens. This is not an idea, something that could happen. It's on a daily basis. Most Russian forces frequently looted and pillaged schools they occupied, a war crime. And I say it without hesitation. Many students whose schools were damaged or destroyed had to continue their studies elsewhere, including through remote learning. This report describes that Russian forces' attack on power infrastructure and consequent electricity and internet outages have also frequently impeded students' ability to access remote education resources. Again, a crime. This afternoon, as I would wish, we will follow up the Assembly urgent debate resolution of this year and our recommendation on deportation and forceful transfers of Ukrainian children and other civilians to Russian Federation or to Ukrainian territories temporarily occupied. Create conditions for their safe return, stop these crimes, and punish these perpetrators. As you know, the Assembly called to ensure the immediate return of unlawfully transferred and deported Ukrainian children. The Parliamentary Assembly could act as a facilitator, this is my belief, to find possible solutions to the tracing and the safe return of deported children, helping them to reunite with their families or legal guardians. This is a matter of utmost importance, given the extreme vulnerability of children who now suffer the consequences of Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine. The Assembly, as you know, called upon Russia to cease immediately and unconditionally the unlawful forcible transfer and deportation of Ukrainian children to the Russian Federation, Belarus, or within temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories, to halt any adoption, but procedures underway to stop the imposition imposition of Russian citizenship and to reestablish the children's links with their parents and carers and repatriate them to their homeland or to release them to a safe third country. The Assembly also asked that Russia provides representatives and staff of relevant United Nations bodies and other international human rights and humanitarian mechanisms and organizations, such as the International Committee of the Red Cross, with unhindered, immediate, and safe access to Ukrainian children, to provide reliable and comprehensive information about their numbers and whereabouts, and ensure their dignified treatment and their safe return. As said, the head of state and government of the Council of Europe members reaffirmed in the Reykjavik summit half May that all children of Ukraine are entitled to enjoy the full range of human rights enshrined in international law, and that the best interest of the child shall be the primary consideration in all decision making concerning them. They underlined in Reykjavik the need to intensify efforts to guarantee the effective protection of the rights of children of Ukraine. Today, colleagues, we will discuss the specific steps that the international community can take to reach these aims. I'm happy that there will be a series of interventions from experts to help us to guide us in this process. We politicians, we do have the duty to take action to support children of Ukraine in host countries and within Ukraine so that they can have a good future. We also have the duty to make every possible effort to help the return of Ukrainian deported and forcible transferred children. Again, we are here talking perhaps about the main victims of this war that should never have started and should end as soon as possible, on the basis that justice will be done to all, especially the children of Ukraine. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a very fruitful conference, and we are now in the hands of Olena.
Thank you, Mr. Tini Cox. And now I would like to give the floor to Ms. Despina Chatzivassiliou-Tsovilis, the Secretary General of the Parliamentary Assembly. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very honored to moderate this morning session, but I'm also very emotional, and please forgive me for that, because I had the privilege to welcome in my home on 8 March 2022, just a couple of weeks after the war started, a Ukrainian child, my little Adele, who was 4 years old a couple of months later. Adele arrived with her mother, and she was the first child to be taken in the European school in Strasbourg. And other colleagues of mine, including Tanya Klein-Sorge, the head of secretariat of the Social Affairs Committee, had also welcomed Ukrainian children. These children were in a way lucky because they had their parents. Others are less lucky because they lost them. Now, 1 year later, March 2023, some 4 million Ukraine people were under temporary protection in the EU. Of these, 37%, almost half, are women, and more than 1/3, 34%, are children, whose protection remains a critical priority. We are speaking about more than 1,360,000 children who are now living under temporarily outside Ukraine, but we will hope, with our support, also return to Ukraine when peace is restored. Around 69% of the displaced children are under 13 years of age, and 0.5% were registered as unaccompanied minors. The goal of this meeting, and more specifically of this morning session, is to foster political support for our member states' future actions to ensure the best possible reception for the Ukrainian children currently in the Council of Europe member states. This includes meeting the specific needs of these children, ensuring an optimal level of protection, access to healthcare, continuity of education, access to their own language and culture, and so on. As I mentioned to you, I have my own personal experience of the difficulties of access to education in a city that is meant to be the capital of Europe, Strasbourg. So I can imagine how difficult it can be elsewhere for Ukrainian children to receive proper education. At the same time, I have to say we are grateful to the European School and other schools in Strasbourg who did welcome Ukrainian children, but it was not as obvious as one would have imagined. Our assembly discussed in its resolution 2495 on the basis of a report by Mr. Pisco on deportations and forcible transfers of Ukrainian children and other civilians to the Russian Federation or to temporarily occupied Ukrainian territories, create conditions for their safe return, stop these crimes, and punish the perpetrator, and called for political and financial support to Ukraine in its recovery process, including the children of Ukraine. The president of our assembly, Mr. Tini Cox, already mentioned the declaration of the Reykjavik summit, where our heads of member state and government ensured inter alia the support for the children of Ukraine. As you know, most member states of the Council of Europe have been active in providing such support. Access to housing, access to education and healthcare required some adjustment in public service provision, creation of adequate support systems with qualified staff to help children settle temporarily in another state, be it in Ukraine's closest neighboring countries like Poland and the Republic of Moldova or other Council of Europe member states. Sharing best practices will help us guarantee the best possible conditions for Ukrainian children to live in dignity, with due respect to the principle of child's best interest in private or public service provision all over Europe. To further develop the sharing of experience and good practice, the Council of Europe intergovernmental actor has launched recently a consultation group through the so-called consultation group on the children of Ukraine. The Assembly will be kept informed about the results of these consultations. Their objective is to clarify the situation in the Council of Europe member states and adjust public policies accordingly from legal and technical point of views. Specific issues, such as the question of legal guardianship, are being discussed. For example, we welcome these developments and shall follow them up in 2024. For our part, and for the more political aspects, we have just decided at the Bureau of the Assembly to hold an urgent affairs debate at the January part session on the children of Ukraine. I hope we will manage to carry out this important task, and I'm very confident that today's talks will feed into the report and this debate. I shall now open the morning session, Madam Chair. We will hear from our guest speakers and have a discussion with them after they have spoken. I suggest that speakers take up 10 minutes, and I would be grateful if we keep with the timing. I would propose that we have a short discussion after each topic, if there are questions and comments, and I would start with the access to health care for Ukrainian children who have found temporary protection outside their region, within Ukraine or in another Council of Europe member states. We are honored to have with us the Deputy Minister of Health Protection for International Affairs, Mrs. Maryna Slobodnichenko, and I'm very pleased to give you the floor, Madam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Despina. I will continue Ukrainian language, and that is why I ask you, use your, because I want to share with you my emotion, and I want to share with you emotion of Ukrainian children. And that is why, please, let only 2 minutes we change our place to Ukraine. Я розкажу вам сьогодні про тиху епідемію. Я розкажу вам сьогодні про травму покоління. Я почну про це говорити з власного прикладу. тому що я хочу, щоб ви відчули те, що відчуваємо ми, українці, і що відчувають українські діти. Я маю племінницю, їй всього-навсього 5 років. Вона звичайна дівчинка, ми живемо в селі під Києвом. І коли почалася війна, ми почали з нею грати в гру, в хованки. Ми грали в цю гру, тому що треба було майже кожного дня спускатися в підвал. Нам пощастило, тому що ми маємо підвал в декількох секундах від нашого будинку. Вона залюбки грала в цю гру, ми намагалися психологічно захистити її від цих атак і не завдати їй стресу. Через місяць їй набридло грати в гру. Через 4 місяці вона почала чекати свого тата з війни. Сьогодні вона попросила мене навчити її не різдвяної колядки. Вона попросила навчити її молитві, щоб молитися за свободу України, за свого тата і інших військових людей. Неможливо передати словами, неможливо передати словами,
В іншу сторону.
Неможливо передати словами ті цифри, які ви зараз бачите. 512 дітей вбиті Росією. Неможливо передати словами те, що майже 1300 дітей мають мінно-вибухові травми. Неможливо передати словами те, уявіть, що діти піддавалися сексуальному насильству. І найменшій дитині було 4 роки. Неможливо передати словами те, що майже 20 тисяч дітей примусово були переміщені за кордон, депортовані. І жахливо те, що ми навіть не знаємо на сьогодні всієї кількості, скільки це дітей насправді є. Наприклад, Росія в своїх статистичних даних показує, що на її території перебуває 744 тисячі українських дітей. Що робить Україна? Ви знаєте, ми стоїмо щитом. І ми вистоїмо. Ми відновлюємося, ми трансформуємося. Я, до речі, принагідно всіх вас вітаю з вчорашнім великим святом. Україна
situation. We are adapting and transforming. And I would like to address my congratulations because yesterday the negotiations for accession to the EU accomplished a big step forward. So we are that much closer to becoming members of the EU, and that's a great victory for us. This map illustrates the Ukrainian healthcare system, the children's healthcare system. These are towns where there is medical help for children. And you see the numbers here. These are the numbers of children hospitalized because they have been victims of the Russian aggression. 247 in the southeast, 271 in the northeast, 119 in the southeast. These are the areas in Ukraine that have a border with the Russian Federation, a neighboring country. And only 2 days ago, the Children's Hospital in Kyiv was hit, was the target, and suffered shelling by the Russians. some shrapnel from missiles partially destroyed the hospital. And we are therefore obliged to create our own medical care network, healthcare network. And this is our project. It received the support of Olena Zelenska, our First Lady, and other First Ladies. The goal of this network is to be able to provide healthcare for children. A few months ago, we launched a partnership through which we work hand in hand with hospitals in partner countries. And so this is not just part of our reconstruction effort. There is a large proportion of innovation. It's really about making the most of new experiences, new opportunities for the benefit of the Ukrainian children treated abroad. And it is also an opportunity for us to share our experience. And so it's a new partnership. And our friend Olena, who is here, your country is also part of our partnership. You provide us with a lot of support, and it helps us really to overcome many, many difficulties. France is also very active in our partnership. French hospitals have signed partnership agreements and an agreement to share best practices also with Ukrainian hospitals. And you have a QR code here up on the screen that you can scan with your phone. That will take you directly to a web page of the Ministry of Health. Please share these contacts with your authorities so that perhaps new partnerships, new initiatives can take place. I would like to offer you, your countries, my most sincere thanks for the help received and any help you can provide as of now. You see this map of countries around the world who have joined the Medevac EU program. On the screen here, you see those countries that have welcomed some of our children and treat or help them. You have here a number, the numbers identify the number of children involved, but there are others. 131 children have been transferred for treatment to your institutions in your countries. So this is an ongoing program. It's going well. And myself and the Ukrainian Ministry of Health offer our most sincere thanks for your very precious help. And now I'd like to share with you some very important information. Countries around the world have welcomed some of our children who suffer with cancer, oncological diseases. Over 1,500 children have been able to have access to medical centers in your countries. Now, I'm not going to comment all these numbers, but they are very telling. They testify to the severity of the situation and how difficult the day-to-day situation is. And perhaps the biggest challenge that we're exposed to right now is the psychological trauma to children. And mental health issues are huge, and they are a looming problem. Of course, other countries share these issues, but there are many factors that explain these psychological factors. First of all, children being taken out of their day-to-day lives, having to change their routines drastically, undergoing shelling, bombing, having to take urgent shelter when the air sirens go off. Lots of things can impact our mental health. And so we have taken the appropriate measures to try and combat the consequences of this mental health situation. And one of the ways we can do that is by training specialists that could provide support to children. Of course, that also takes money to invest in facilities, rehabilitation centers, for example. And we have pinpointed the Odessa region as a region where mental health centers will be necessary. New mental health facilities will be necessary for children to provide them with the support that will help them to overcome their psychological trauma. That is true for children in Ukraine and for children that have been welcomed abroad as well. And it really is a generational trauma that is affecting Ukraine. Our children's mental health is being impacted. It is like a virus spreading throughout the country. It is impossible right now to determine the long-term impact of this. One generation, several generations may be impacted by the trauma we're experiencing as a country right now. Only time will tell. Only in many years will we be able to take the full measure of these consequences. And so please join us to help fight this epidemic. Thank you very much.
Рада, що спробувала
And it's a real pleasure for me for having been able to share, these emotions with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you, Madam Slobodnichenko, for showing the pictures, for sharing the figures and the experiences. And I think all those of us who have been together with Ukrainian children know what you're talking about when you're talking about the trauma. Now, if we can continue on the same topic by giving the floor to somebody who works in another country, in a neighboring country, Ms. Line Dambine, Chair of the Board of the Children's Hospital Foundation from Latvia. We would be very interested to know about the psychological rehabilitation camps you have set up, the concept, the work, the efforts you are doing. Thank you. Your
Thank you
floor
very
is
much.
yours.
Hello to everyone. And before my presentation is getting ready, I again want to congratulate not only Ukrainians, but all of us, European community, on yesterday's historical decision. I'm very happy about it. We welcome you in Europe, and hopefully it's going to happen soon. I will continue with the presentation then before it is getting technical details are getting ready. But I will share our experience in Latvia, not only how we are helping our Ukrainian children who have found refuge in Latvia, but also to those who still live and undergo the tragedies of war on everyday basis. And when we understood that we can help not only those children in Latvia, but also those in Ukraine, the whole new chapter started. And I hope that you will see those results and will be able to appreciate what we are doing and the results which we have achieved. How should I do with the presentation? Sorry.
You should just sit on this.
Maybe
yes, of course, we can exchange.
you change,
It's gonna
yeah.
be easier. Yes. Thank you. Like this. Okay, yes.
Would Mrs. Dambine please turn on a microphone and turn off the microphone that was previously switched on, please? Thank you.
So I think now we probably all set. So shortly, I just wanted for you to see the situation in Latvia. My two organizations I represent, one is Child and Adolescent Resource Center, which is a community-based mental health service for adolescents. And one is Children's Hospital Foundation, which also works to support children with different health issues and needs. we see that as in different countries, most of the children who found refugee are children. Most of the people from Ukraine are children. And we also see, and it's in accordance with typical knowledge about psychiatric care, that most of children do not need a very specific, highly specialized psychiatric care. They need more community-based and those kind of services. And most of them actually need the most secure environment, education, as you were already mentioning here. Therefore, we as well in Latvia concentrated on those first aid help, and we knew that the children who are coming to Latvia most likely are not going to be physically traumatized, but they're going to be mentally traumatized. So therefore, we focused on mental health support. We identified the barriers. I'm pretty sure that most of the European Union countries have the same or similar barriers that we did. Language. We didn't have specialists, psychologists speaking Ukrainian, so they could provide support, but we had specialists fluent in Russian, and therefore some of the support was provided in Russian. But we early tried to identify whether some of those people who have come to Latvia as refugees maybe are psychologists, and we found some, and therefore we hired them immediately. And already since March 2022, we had Ukrainian specialists consulting our children, Ukrainian children, but our children as well, of course, and in Ukrainian language, small children starting from early ages and their mothers, of course. We knew that we have lack of skills in trauma-focused treatments, as most of the countries abroad. We're still learning, but this is what we acknowledge and try to focus to learn new things. The lack of specialists, I think it's also a common problem within the European Union. We lack psychiatric care specialists, and we knew that there's stigma on mental health in Ukraine. I've had read it myself about it before, but it was very obvious also when the refugees started to come. And therefore, we set the psychological support not somewhere in the office, but at those crisis centers where those children and families arrive. Therefore, they don't even know that they are receiving a mental health support. There's just this nice person who talks and who identifies whether there is a need for a specific support in a longer term. Yes, I already discussed the overcoming barriers as well. So yes, we concentrate on acute support, and we still do it, even though, of course, at the moment, we have many Ukrainian children and families receiving a long-term mental health support. We also have produced 15 short animation as a result of psychological therapies for Ukrainian children. Those animations are in Ukrainian, Latvian, and English. And there you can see from the art therapy perspective how those children have drawn their story. And it is very important to work with your trauma if you can express yourself, and expressing by drawing the situation. And the aim was to draw the happy ending, and therefore all of these children have their own happy endings of their story, which of course for all of them 100% includes going back home to Ukraine. But then again, yes, we knew what we can do in Latvia, but we also really wanted to provide some kind of help to those children who are still living in Ukraine in times of war. And therefore, the best way how to do it, in my opinion, is to form partnerships. And we partnered with two organizations working also in mental health field. One is Gen Ukrainian, and one is already mentioned Ahmedid Children's Hospital. We knew the scope of the problem, and this is statistics which were already mentioned here about internally displaced, externally displaced. And we also know that, as you already, Mr. Cox mentioned, that all Ukrainian children have psychological trauma, and we've witnessed it also through our camps. So this is more rehabilitation camp concept. We put it together with Ahmedid Children's Hospital. We needed something that is feasible, that do not take the children for a long time out of their natural environment, even if it's a war. So therefore, we knew that we want to help children and mothers, which is very important because the mother will be the one who can support their child in a long term. So the timing, 10 days, community setting, again, no mental health associations, psychiatric associations. They live in a 5-star hotel in the middle of the center in Riga. Psychological support, entertainment, various activities that just children like and enjoy, and specialist knowledge. Also, you already mentioned, we see it as a very important thing to share knowledge, to new learn things. And therefore, with each camp, there are specialists coming from Ahmediyat learning new things, how we work with children so they can go back and use it in their psychological interventions. We knew that we cannot go deep and work with trauma in a deep way. So therefore, we focused on, yes, less structured interventions, safe environment, recreational activities, and we focused on relationships and resources because many of these families who are coming in the camp, they are internally displaced. They're coming from regions such as Donbass, Kharkiv, Luhansk. They've experienced Russian occupation. They have physical war trauma from explosions. They have lost one of the parents, relatives, close people, and they have lost home. Therefore, this approach to work on resources and on relationships, us ourselves, we saw it after the first camp that what mothers really needed. They have lost their social relationships, social support environment, and through these camps they form these relationships and therefore can support each other after they already return to Ukraine. This is just a short summary of those 4 camps. The next camp is going to take place now in end of the January, and the first time we will host children who have been deported to Russia. And they will come with their parents or caregivers, because it depends. Of course, we know that some of the children, unfortunately, have lost their parents. We see, this is just how we work. I can forward the presentation, and these are just methods how our specialists work. And we are very flexible. We understand that each group is very different. We have children ages 6 to 18. You never know what has happened the exact day in Ukraine. And we've had situations when we plan our group therapy and there's a devastating news coming in from Ukraine, and we change everything and we work with the issue which is present at that exact moment. Yes, again, I already told about mothers. Mothers are wonderful. I just want to, yes, thank them so much. It's always just amazing to see how resilient they are, how strong and courageous they are, and how they support their children. They fight for every day. So therefore, we are very happy that we can support them in their way to keep supporting their children when they go back. And we see the results are fantastic. Actually, we get feedback regular from Ahmediyat Children's Hospital because all of these children have underlying physical disease. Therefore, they go to Ahmediyat Hospital on a regular basis and they see how those results are keeping up. And the one aspect which is very important, I think, in your level, when you think about and plan about support, the feedback, because we are not the only country where such camps take place. But what we have discussed with Ahmediyat, that probably the countries which are closer to Ukraine are the most comfortable environment for these children and for those mothers, because this is already something familiar to them. And also the distance, because children need to travel to camp and they need to go back. Therefore, strengthening such kind of activities in a closer area to Ukraine, I think would be a smart way how to provide assistance and help. Slava Ukraini. We are very happy that, as you know, probably that Latvia supports Ukraine in many ways, and we also have a very strong support from our presidents, previous existing president, Prime Minister Evika Siliņa. They all are very, very supportive, and therefore, yes, we stand with you as long as it takes. Thank you. These are my contacts, just in case.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Dambina. I think you managed to cover all issues which are common to other countries that are hosting Ukrainian children. And I think you gave both you and Mrs. Slobodnichenko food for thought and for questions. So I would prefer to open now the floor for questions or comments by the members before we continue to the next topic. Mr. Rousopoulos, Chair of the Migration Committee, you have.
Thank you, Madam President. On behalf of the Migration Committee, I have the honor to be the chair of the Migration Committee for the last 2 terms. I would like to make a statement, and this is as such. From the first moment, the Council of Europe has denounced the forced deportation and transfer of Ukrainian children to the Russian Federation on Ukrainian territories temporarily occupied and has deemed Russia accountable. The act of forcibly displacing innocent children from their homes and families is not just a breach of international law, but a profound moral injustice that demands our constant attention and action. Mr. Pisco's report, my friend Paulo's report on deportations and forcible transfer of Ukrainian children stands as an extremely testament to the urgent need for action, compassion, and justice. It underscores our unwavering dedication to preserving human dignity overall and upholding international law despite the ongoing unprovoked Russia's war in Ukraine. Every child deserves a safe and nurturing environment to grow, learn, and thrive. Yet, the ongoing forced deportations of Ukrainian children by the Russian Federation not only deprives them of their homes and stability, but also inflicts lasting trauma that can irreversibly impact their physical and mental well-being. It's imperative that we stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine during this distressing time. We have rightly denounced these forced deportations and transfers as they represent a grave violation of human dignity and fundamental rights enshrined in our conventions. Last but not least, let us reaffirm our commitment to upholding human rights, rule of law, and democracy. Together, through collective action and unwavering determination, we can strive towards a world where such atrocities have no place and where every child can live in peace, security, and prosperity within their own communities. I want to thank our distinguished guests today for the input they gave to us, and I want to assure them that we are here, and we will be here. While discussing the issue the day before yesterday, I told to our president, Mr. Tiny Cox, and to my Ukrainian friends that we face, in such cases, 4 different stages. The first stage, we were all shocked by the invasion. The second stage, the second phase, we were all angry. The third, we reacted. But the fourth, sorry to say that, is that we are going to get used to it. We must not get used to such situations. It is not normality. We are here, and we will be here as the most important institution around the world for human rights to stand by the Ukrainians and show the people around the world that we have to fight and fight and fight again for democracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rousopoulos. If I can now pass the floor to the chair of the Social Affairs, Sustainable Development and Health Committee, Mr. Simon Moutkian. Simon, vous avez la parole.
Merci, Madame la.
Thank you very much. I will speak in French. Please put your headphones on. I'd like to thank you all for being here today. I'd like to thank Olena for the tremendous work that was done in order to organize this meeting. It's a very important meeting. And I'd like to congratulate once again the Ukrainian delegation and all the Ukrainians for what was done yesterday. It was a major step taken forward yesterday. Now, Ukraine was already a member of the European family, because Ukraine is a member of the Council of Europe. Because when we talk about the European family, it goes beyond the European Union. Anyway, thank you very much. We're very happy with what happened yesterday. And I'd like to focus on children. I believe that this afternoon we'll talk about deportations. So we'll come back to that this afternoon. But I think that the best interest of the child is really what must be our top priority when we talk about children experiencing terrible conditions such as war or natural disasters. And I looked at the drawings, and I was actually very interested to see that this is similar work that we did, that was done in Turkey for the children who were victims of earthquakes. And this is precisely what Russia is doing. Russia is devastating, is destroying all the hopes of the children. Now, I have questions. We often talk about post-trauma shocks. When we listen to you, we can see that Ukrainian children are still experiencing trauma. And whereas children refugee in another country is probably on the way to healing, although I'm not sure that we can heal from such trauma. So my question is, what do you need in Ukraine? You said that you needed psychologists. Do we need to organize twinning programs between hospitals, for example, or mental health being? Is that what you would need in Ukraine? So that was my first question. And more generally on health issues, what do you need? What do the children needs or the adolescent needs? Some of them were already ill in Ukraine, and we know that the health system in Ukraine has so much to do. So what exactly do you need? Do you need to help to evacuate the injured children from the territory of Ukraine? And in situations of war and conflict, we very seldom talk about the mental health of soldiers. And we know that children becomes an adult at 18. And we know that when you turn 19, sometimes you're still a child. So I also think about all these very young adults who actually take part in the fighting. Is there any mental support for these very young adults that are very often in the front line to defend the country? So these were my preliminary questions. Anyway, thank you very much for what you're doing and for your presentations as well.
I propose that we take all questions, and then I give back the floor to the panelists. Madame Evgenia Kravchuk, Chair of the Committee on Culture, Science, Education and Media.
Thank you, Despina, Madam Chair. I will speak later on educational part, but because I'm waiting for the actual presentation of my colleague, who is the head of the Education Committee in Ukraine. But I want to stop on a few points and reflect on what we've heard from Despina and from our speakers. Well, first of all, I think it's very important. I'll start with the first word of Despina, that we had this I don't know, it's consultation group, as you mentioned, because I got some information that a lot of problems are in the member states, especially with the legal guidance, how the different national legislation work in different countries. And it'd be my question and a proposal, maybe to have an exchange from this governmental side. I don't know what committee would be better fit for that, social or migrational, or maybe joint hearing. Because I think that's the thing that we have to follow in both, our resolutions and exchange of information between the parliamentarians from member states. I'd like to thank for a great presentation to Maryna. I think it's not, I'm not very used for such presentation from governmental officials that actually put not just words but heart to what they do. So that's very important, and I really urge you to follow that QR code and find maybe like a horizontal connections to hospitals. And just a small reminder, when Russians were kicked out from the temporary occupied territories in Kherson region, in Kharkiv region, what they did, they stole everything from hospitals and from schools. So hospitals and schools there are naked. So if you want to aid them with any technologies, equipment and everything, because we have great doctors, we have great teachers, but they need tools to work with. Another thing is, and it's probably the question to Lien. I think what you do is fascinating. So I have two questions. First, do you work with other countries, so to share your experience? Because I'd like to connect you to my friends who do the same things, like in Czech Republic, in other countries. I think it's very important to give this sort of practical information. And a question: I know that a lot of Ukrainian kids, maybe not a lot, but some Ukrainian kids experience bullying in schools where they attend in member states, and it's becoming a problem. It's also part of the problem because I think Ukraine is still in the shadow of Russia. So when you read the school book in different countries about Ukraine, it's like 2 pages information, how much the country, what is the population, and that's it. So kids in school in member states do not know a lot about Ukraine, and I think it's also part of a problem. But do you do the the counseling, the trauma counseling on that aspect, and what would be the best practices to fight bullying in schools? Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Kravchuk. Let me take 2 more questions. Mrs. Larisa Bilozir, also member of the Ukrainian delegation.
First, I would like to start, colleagues, with a great gratitude to everybody of you. Yesterday's decision is a contribution of each and every of you. And telling the truth, we were crying yesterday, some of us, because together with our colleagues of Council of Europe member states, and this is a great decision, and it will change the history for good for Ukraine and help to transform Ukraine. And I would like also to thank for the leadership of PACE. PACE is #1 and Council of Europe in providing the resolution, taking decisions very fast. And actually this committee has to cope with very large range of issues. Can you see, it's not only deported children, it's also the old children. And I must tell you, 7 million children of Ukraine were affected by the war. They are all war children. And my children also were with first days on March, when we came with a women delegation in the PACE, where they admitted to the PACE and were sitting in the hemicycle. And I want to thank you, because I had so many propositions to take my children to live there in European countries. They stayed in Strasbourg, but I must tell you that in European school, and they are with one of our colleagues, and I must tell you that they are also traumatized. They're coming back to home, and last May, like 1 month, they were ill, and we have to go to the bomb shelter this May, each day, each night. I must tell you, it's so exhausting. I have 3 children, and it's so exhausting to wake up and to go. So thank you for taking this issue in the center. In Ukraine, we have a great hope for this committee, and I am sure it will be #1 in deciding this issue. So I wanted to return to the health access, and we have not only schools, 4,000 schools, as you said, destroyed or damaged, and killed kindergartens and educational facilities, but we have almost 1,000 of the hospitals destroyed. And as Evgenia said, they were stealing everything. We had very good equipped hospitals in Kharkiv. Maria made a big effort to do this in Kharkiv. This is her constituency, and they just destroyed totally for the newly born children. So we are missing this equipment, and we are missing places for children to go. And the last thing I wanted to remind you, we had this awful story in Groza, when they destroyed half of the village. It was on the funeral dinner, and they just destroyed all the families. And I know each with Pavel Sushko, we talked to each and every. There are 14 people that became orphans. Of course, they got the guardianships of their aunts, and there is a grandfather that in 75 years he lost everybody: daughter, the son-in-law, all their relatives, and he is with 3 children. They are, it's a great disaster, and actually we have to keep an eye on these people and to make a register. And we have already the law in the parliament where we want to make a register for the court, for the tribunal, to investigate and to compensate this money for the loss. It can't be compensated by money, but still we have to keep an eye on these children and to take care of them. But as I told you, it's 7 million children that were dramatized by this war, as our nation is totally dramatized. So a long way to go and a long way to work. So thank you for this. I'm sure this committee will have a great result. Thank you for each of you.
Thank you, Larissa, for your personal statement. And can I give now the floor to Ms. Sandra Kalnina-Lukashevska, please, from Latvia, the chair of the Latvian delegation.
Many thanks, dear Despina, dear colleagues. First of all, I'm really grateful for the ability to have this meeting here today, thanks to our decision to establish this ad hoc committee. I think it's a crucial decision we took at the pace. So later today, we will focus more on the deported children, so children illegally brought to Russia, and there are many questions. But focusing at this moment at the needs of Ukrainian children in Ukraine and in Europe, let me mention 2 points. First of all, concerning health, we see that enormous amount of support and rehabilitation is needed, including to the children who are returned from Russia. Their health, both physical and mental, is badly impacted, and they need huge support and recovery. I think, and I would suggest that it should be included in the damage register as well, and compensations should be claimed when it will be possible. But at this moment, we need to provide all the possible support. And secondly, on education, my question would be,
Sorry, Sandra, if I can interrupt you for education, please wait for the next panel.
Okay, it's kind of connected. Just if I may, very quickly, as we see that one of the dilemmas is either to encourage all the Ukrainian children to attend local schools or to accept distance learning. So it has a very close link with psychological health. So sometimes they say that they would like just to stay home and participate in distance learning in Ukrainian schools, but it has impact on their well-being and psychological health. So my question would be also in this format, how should we approach this question, because it has this dual reason. Thank you.
Thank you, Zada. And our last speaker, Mrs. Adamara from Switzerland, please.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. Thank you very much, all of you. I will speak French. Well, thank you very much for these very emotional presentation. I have a question. We welcomed 14,000 Ukrainian children. Many of them were their mothers, and some of them came from orphanages. We have approximately 100 children, where actually they arrived from Mariupol. They came to Switzerland. Now, I do have in mind that we'll talk about education later on, but I do have a question. We host countries, we welcome Ukrainian children, and as I could actually observe in Switzerland, when the first Ukrainians arrived, we wanted to integrate Ukrainian children in existing schools, but at the same time, helping them maintain their links with their own culture, because we have in mind that one day they will go back to Ukraine. Now, for orphans, now, of course, we're talking about very small children as well as, older children. It's necessary to keep a relationship with relatives in Ukraine. It's important for their mental health well-being. Now, I know there's a whole debate going on. Are we talking about refugees or not? The fact is, we're talking about children leaving that country to go to another country. So it is migration. And when we talk about migration, it's always there's the issue of stability. So what would be the right balance? How can we make sure that the children feel comfortable in a host country? I'm not sure I'm clear. How can we strike the right balance? Telling the children you'll go back to Ukraine when there'll be peace, and at the same time, simultaneously saying you have to integrate in this whole country because this way you will feel good. So, what would be your advice? It's a first time for me. I really don't know exactly how to react. So, do you have any advice? Thank you very much, Mrs. Maha. And we will come back to this question when we're talk about the status that you actually mentioned yourself.
To the two lady panelists for some short, please, answers and comments. I thought of taking Mr. Lubinets afterwards. No, you prefer that?
I just want to add some information about this topic. Mr. President, Madam Chair, dear colleagues, I didn't heard the number of destroyed healthcare facility, and I want to emphasize that you will understand the huge and size of tragedy. For today, Russian Federation destroyed 1,668 healthcare facilities, 384 hospitals, 352 ambulatories, and this number from all territory of Ukraine. You know that Russian missile destroyed, for example, healthcare on Zaporizhia region, Donetsk region, Lugansk, and Lviv, Zakarpattia. So you can understand that now we don't have the safety region in Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lubinets. Mr. Lubinets, the Ukrainian Parliament Commissioner for Human Rights. I want to thank you in particular because you had started the whole discussion when you came to see us with the president on 1st February. I remember you gave us the figures, and this is how we started really paying higher attention on this so critical issue. Now, may I ask Mrs. Slobodnichenko and Mrs. Despina for some short, please, answers and comments. I'm afraid we are already running out of time. Thank you very much.
Дякую за надане слово. Насправді ваші питання дуже важливі. І я вам дуже є в Україні. Дякую вам за це чітке питання.
Well, I'm going to tell you about our requirements. Thank you very much for answering these questions.
Ранок з України.
What's really important is to talk about rehabilitation. And I'd really like to support what my colleague said. We need rehabilitation centers, psychological and physical rehabilitation centers. In Ukraine, there are huge needs for prosthetic limbs, and we're talking about a situation that changed over time, and we also need specialists. We need prosthetic arms and legs. And given that we don't have enough specialists able to work with prosthetic limbs, we really need your help. And we need psychologists. We really need to train specialists. So we're not talking here about remote learning because that would not be efficient enough. So we really need specialists to help us on the ground. So thank you very much in advance for helping us train specialists.
I heard for myself. But maybe complementing what you said on those specialists and remote help, yes, Ukraine needs psychologists. Psychologists are burning out. That's a one great factor. It's been 2 years almost, and people just cannot keep on working, also living at the same time in the situation of war. And there, of course, the training is an essential part. And the good thing is now we know that there's an evidence that CBT therapies, for example, for children, which is one of the most effective methods in psychotherapy. The remote consultations have the same level of effectiveness than the face-to-face. Therefore, that's a good resource potential to invest and to develop these remote services, considering the scope of Ukraine, the territory, and the children in need. About what you said about schools, I think it really goes together. At least overlaps a little bit was the colleague from Switzerland was asking about the school environment and how to better address the school environment. We all know that school is essentially important for child's development. On face-to-face in their social networks, it can be support to families, it can be support to children themselves. Therefore, school environment is essential for them to develop, to have a good mental health. At first, I understand there was not an understanding about how long it's going to take. And therefore, of course, many parents opted for the remote learning, so their child could stay in the school in Ukraine. Now it's been, again, almost 2 years, and there should be more effort how to integrate children in our school systems, because it is good for them, it is necessary, it's this primary level, as I was showing, for mental health as well. About bullying in school, yes, it's a major issue in Latvia as well. In Latvia, not only for Ukrainian children, Latvia is in a worse place in EU if we look at those bullying rates in school. Therefore, we have a big homework ourselves for our children, for Ukrainian children, whichever child goes to school in Latvia. And we are slowly but starting to address this issue. But of course, if there's a bullying, no integration in school is possible. And even, of course, even specialists could suggest, look for social networks somewhere else. So for instance, I don't know, physical activities, drawing classes or something. But that should also be kept in mind, how we as a country who have taken responsibility for those children, have hosted them in our country, what do we are able to provide? Do we just physically see the statistics? Okay, they're not going to school. Okay, fine, that's their choice. At the same time, knowing that they should be in school, that it would be really good for them and would really help them. The question about the experience sharing, yes, it's one of the reasons actually I'm here today, that I want to show any European country can do these kind of psychological support camps. It's feasible. Unfortunately, many NGOs, we cannot take children back from Russia. We don't have any means or tools for that. But many organizations have means and tools to provide psychological, other kind of support to Ukrainian children. And our camps are organized only 100% for donations. Therefore, it's not even government funding or kind of any official funding. It is feasible, and I really hope that there will be more such means of support for Ukrainian children in European Union. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Despina. Just to explain, sometimes there is a gap. It's because we are here in the translation when the Ukrainian speaker finishes. That's why I don't react immediately. I wait for the translation to finish. I think we learned already a lot from the first session. I would like now to pass to the second sub-item, which is about access to education, and give the floor to Mr. Serhei Babak, Chair of the Committee on Education, Science and Innovation from the Ukrainian Parliament. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Babak. If you can speak from your seat or you prefer to come in front,
I will
as
speak
you
from
wish.
here.
Thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Dear members of committee, dear colleagues, I will speak Ukrainian if you don't mind.
when we will discuss the situation in educational system. So please put on your headphones once again. Шановні члени комітету,
Dear members of the committee, now it's an honor for me to be with you here today. Today has been 668 days since the beginning of the conflict, and every day we are experiencing bombing, attacks, drone attacks, ballistic missiles. In the two very first weeks of the aggression of this war, close to 30% of our territory was either occupied or underwent unprecedented attacks, and that led to an incredible wave of emigration from Ukraine. Over 6 million Ukrainians found shelter in countries other than their own. And we are infinitely thankful to all of you for having opened your homes, your countries, and to have welcomed our fellow Ukrainians. One of the main priorities for any country at war is to protect its citizens, in particular children, and to give them an education, continue giving them an education. So to protect them and to give them the opportunity to learn and therefore be able to fulfill themselves. And we are very grateful to all European countries for having offered shelter, of course, but also for having welcomed our children and having allowed them to access educational facilities. If that had not been offered, then Ukrainian children would already have lost 2 years of education, so affecting an entire generation. Support and help to Ukrainian children abroad is really crucial for us. So it is a challenge. It is not easy to adapt and adjust to a new environment. We have implemented a very wide range of initiatives to continue guaranteeing education and economic development. And one of these support measures is support to Ukrainians abroad. It's very important for our fellow citizens to stay Ukrainian, to keep that link with Ukraine alive, to continue speaking, writing in Ukrainian. Unfortunately, for the close to 2 years of this total war, full-scale war, Ukrainians who have had to flee the country are beginning to lose their bearings. That bond with Ukraine is becoming ever tenuous. So we have to redouble our efforts and continue supporting them. Young Ukrainians have had to continue their education locally, which is a good thing that they've been able to do it. But Ukrainians abroad have to do so in foreign schools and also continue learning in the Ukrainian education system through online classes. So that's a huge workload. It also takes a lot of discipline. And so we have made it possible for them to follow distance education classes from wherever they are abroad. We have designed modules that will teach them Ukrainian language, history, but also biology, history, and so on. So what can be done to further the integration of children in new environments? This is probably a question you have, and there are two parts to the answer. First of all, learning the language, continuing to work on the language. Very often, many Ukrainians have left to settle in Poland. Polish is a Slavic language, so perhaps it's less difficult to become integrated in Poland, whereas learning German and French are a little more difficult to learn, but not impossible. There are other countries where the language is really a big challenge for Ukrainians. And then there's something specific to children. Children can be quite mean with each other, and therefore some Ukrainian children may be bullied or have difficulty becoming integrated. And so one thing to do is to offer Ukrainian studies. So that would help Ukrainian children integrate more easily, but also this could provide some insight into Ukrainian culture for students in the host country and open them up to the Ukrainian culture. And we'd be very, very grateful to all of you if you could think of incorporating some kind of Ukrainian awareness courses in your curriculum. And so 20,000 educational institutions have been severely damaged or destroyed since the beginning of the war. And that's 1 million pupils that have to continue receiving education online, close to 1/3 offline. Recently, Kyiv was hit by 10 cruise missiles. Quite luckily, our air shield protected the capital, but there was a lot of debris that damaged buildings, etc., when falling to the ground. And this happens every day. I believe that pupils can continue going to school, but the school has to be equipped with a bomb shelter. Shelters provide protection against falling debris and shrapnel. Now, we had not imagined that we could come under attack, so we don't have bomb shelters in every school. But there's a huge need. We need about 4 billion euros in order to equip our schools with bomb shelters. We need to build over 7,500 such bomb shelters. The city of Kharkiv, for example, had over 100,000 pupils. And that city is, as you know, very close to the border with Russia. And when the air raid siren goes off, there's just no time to run to whatever bomb shelter is available. And so pupils in Kharkiv just cannot continue going to school. So imagine that this is happening in the 21st century. And we have just launched or opened the first subterranean underground school in the subway system. Something absolutely unprecedented, but it is the only way to allow children to continue going to school. Because there's something we can be sure of. We can be sure that we do not know when this war is going to end. There is no end in sight. And therefore, we think that the utmost priority is building bomb shelters. Our education system has suffered a huge impact. And in particular, over 3,500 school buses were destroyed or were used for other means by the Russians or by us, used for other purposes. We have tried to continue delivering classes and teaching and getting children to schools using those school buses that we have, but we don't have enough. So there's a huge need there as well. There is something else as well. 1 million pupils, as I mentioned, now learn online, very often from within the bomb shelters. And the only way for them to maintain that relationship with the school system is by electronic handbooks or through distance classes. And so quite shortly, we intend to be able to offer 400,000 tablets or computers. And so the numbers are not enough. We need supplies in tablets or laptops to help children continue learning. Sometimes there's no power, and therefore you can't charge the tablets and they're useless, but we still need to equip our children. And so there's this need for about 400,000 tablets. And we are trying to work on ways to maintain our educational system. Education, children are the second priority for the Ukrainian state after the defense of the country. I mean, what other reason is there to fight except for children? They are our future. And we really appreciate the support and help coming from Europe. Yesterday, the European Union made a historic decision to truly begin negotiations for accession to the European Union for Ukraine. That helps us resist and to protect our right to a better future for our children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Babak, for all the information and very concrete requests you made. May I ask Mr. Hebanovsky to come closer to us, maybe, for his presentation? And I propose to take Mr. Vasyl Lutsyk afterwards, because I understand, Mr. Lutsyk, that you want to speak about some legal issues referring to the status of children and also child care. So let's now have Mr. Hebanovsky. Come.
I prefer this one. Okay, good. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hebanovsky. You have the floor.
Mr. President, Madam Chair, and hello everyone. I'm from NGOs, so I'm not used to this addressing, but it was an interesting moment to do it. I would like to start with some problems, because getting ready for this meeting, I wanted to give you a more kind of a global picture, and I don't know if it works similar with in other countries, but we really have a problem with a very detailed information and data. And I work with my organization with the migrant issues, with the migrant policies for 17 years, and we always have a problem. We don't really know how many of refugees, migrants we have. But what we know, and this is a quite updated information, that we have around almost 1 million active refugees, which means that they have a special status and that they didn't leave Poland for more than 30 days. So that's almost 1 million, but the assumptions we have about, and it's from a very serious also research institutes, is that we altogether have even more than 3 million Ukrainians in Poland. I would be more careful about it. So I put this to 2.3 to 3.3 million Ukrainians, which is absolutely shocking information for a nation that for the communistic times we were one of the most homogenic nations, and now we can say that 6 to 8% of our populations are Ukrainians. And there is another statistic which is quite also important because that gives us a little bit more insight, which is that more than 1.7 million people were Ukrainian refugees who registered their stay in Poland. And from those groups, we basically, I think this is the common statistics we have, is that almost half of the people are women, more than 1/3. Some statistics, Polish UNICEF say more than 40% of refugees are children. And that's basically makes it very clear that we have from the active migrants, active refugees, from 340 to 400,000, even more than 400,000 refugee children in Poland just from Ukraine. And the other statistic, which is important, is quite alarming, is that we have 180,000 children of Ukraine only refugee children in Ukraine from Ukraine in a Polish education system, starting from kindergarten to the high schools, which means from 3 to 18. So that's basically about some data, but I wanted also to say a few maybe comments on it, because first of all, my city, my home city, Warsaw, I think became home of something that was unheard of from times of the Second World War, because we became a home for 300,000 people in around 2 weeks. And the way that we handle it, I think, is that most important was that we had two civil societies. We have a Polish civil society that basically was awakened that moment in February and March. But we also have Ukrainian civil society, and we tend to maybe forget sometimes. And it was somehow, created, I think, very much in the first Orange Revolution and in the Euromaidan, the Rewolucja Gidności, and especially Hromadzki Euromaidan, and especially power of women. That was very important to understand that was the basically recipe, that we didn't have a big refugee camp, that we managed to host millions at some point of people. And it was basically thanks to hundreds of initiatives coming from individuals, coming from NGOs, coming from informal movements, from even the companies, from family business to corporations, and a lot of local administration institutions that sometimes created a very bizarre, I would say, coalitions to do something good. And for example, even today we have one of the, mass shelter, let's say, is created in a house that was supposed to be deconstructed, and some developer was supposed to create a new office, and they basically give it to refugees together with a local district board of the local district and volunteers and companies. In 1 week they created 10 showers, because that was the office, and even now it's still a place which is much better than a tent camp, for example, for sure. So this is it, and just to imagine what kind of things this bizarre coalitions, this initiatives, bottom-up initiatives covers, is from informal education initiatives, from things like Polish language courses, integration camps, even new Ukrainian schools, or the ones who were already in Poland, became much bigger. And also basically summer recreation for children from war-affected areas. So I think something that our colleague from Latvia was also mentioning which is a very important thing as well. But I want to mention also the biggest challenges, because I'm not here just to say what I think worked well. That's what I think was already said before. It's that we have a very big number of children. I think even in our case, a really proportionally bigger than other countries that who are only in online Ukrainian education system or completely out, or they are declaring there are declaration formal that they are in the in the online system, but at the same time, in fact, they are out. And this is very, very big and urgent need for better legislation, especially in Poland, but also I think in a very good collaboration between Polish and Ukrainian governments about this. We have a situation then after UNHCR, UNICEF, IOM, and all those UN agencies arrived to Poland with a lot of and other international organizations supporting, for example, hiring, we call it intercultural assistants in schools. Now we have a situation that just in the next months we will be trying, we are running out of these funds, and there is, of course, less interest in basically the situation in Ukraine. Which is unfortunately combined with a growing needs for integration now. So it's not like we are now in a situation that we were, we can handle the things with the integration on a lower level. No, it's growing. So, so this is one of the other things. The other thing is the need to strengthen legislation capacity basically of Polish school to work with the migrant pupils, not only with basically Ukrainian refugees, but that's something which is now very clearly, we see, for example, that we needed 2 new education professions. One is a teacher of Polish as a foreign language, and definitely the intercultural assistant, basically coming from a background of the migrant students. They have to be recognized. They cannot be treated as for example, as assistants are treated as aid or assistants to the teacher. They should be respected as recognized as the competences, experience that is required for their work. Another thing, Polish foster parenting system and national child protection system is also in urgent need to be updated and upgraded. Just using last 2 years, 2-year experience. Just yesterday, I received also information from UNICEF, and they also underlined that there's 36,000 children, Ukrainian children, that receive temporary guardian in Poland under the Polish child care system, and I think even more than 1,500 children evacuated from orphanages, basically, and accommodated in 24 different facilities around Poland. So this is another subject. It's a little bit between education and childcare. And again, so we basically also, that was also very strongly mentioned, in case of children from Ukraine, we have to especially, what you already mentioned in this room, focus on holistic approach to understand who are the parents. That parents very often are lonely mothers, and there is a lot of much bigger challenges than usually. And again, that's what was already said: fighting discrimination, especially to the groups that are at risk of a double or sometimes triple social exclusions. And we have a very different kind of groups. We have a Roma Ukrainians, we even have Afro Ukrainians, and we have definitely a very different situation with the different groups, with the different cities, with the different places. And what was mentioned and so much important, that Ukrainian identity, and I think it's also a little bit answer on one of the questions. Ukrainian identity and culture should be a very important part of education. We want kids from Ukraine to be in a Polish education system, and at the same time, as much as they are aware, they are strong with their identity, they are better in integrating with Polish, for example, society. something not contrary, but it's even stronger, right? So if you have a kid who is in an online system, in Ukrainian education system, that is very formal, and he's not or she's not, in touch with it's not integrating in that. Even if she or he is in Ukrainian system, they are losing they basically also Ukrainian identity. So it's absolutely, those two things are quite important to understand. There is a strong integration only when you can be proud also of your roots. Okay, and two also other pictures from our coordination support center we created. I would to address this issue relevantly to this group also here that we are right now. I think it's a very important to understand that, well, I would maybe even start of it, that Council of Europe had this, a lot of things that probably people don't even realize that it's a work of Council of Europe, like things like even European identity, European Union identity, like flag and our anthem. But I think more important, even the power of what basically is behind the work to really ensure that human rights are respected in Europe and beyond, and the way how it was somehow, I think, very much the role of Council of Europe to end the death penalty in the world, and of course in Europe especially. So I think it's a very much important to understand that now the challenge is also to somehow go to a little bit next level of democracy. We understand that the electoral democracy is sometimes bringing people like Trump, sorry to be said, like to who are the threat for everything what we already do here, right? And I think it's very much important to somehow understand that, for example, this all information I have, this all recommendation are coming from so many different institutions, so many different organizations, that policymakers or lawmakers in that case should understand that we have to work together. It's a very urgent call to, in the issue of, for example, take it maybe as a pilot of this issue, is to not just stop with a conference like this, but to make a kind of a very much working format conference, task oriented, and invite many actors to challenge this issue. And by the way, it's also could be a good pilot for something that should be, I think, coming to this moment where we work on the issues in smaller groups, when we come to the conclusions, when we treat the informal even movement and NGOs as an equal partner to discuss the needs for the legal changes, legislation changes. So this is what I'm I think coming to you with, and I hope that message will be the most important. Of course, the picture on the top is we did a first conference in Warsaw, which was a Warsaw districts for refugees, and the second one was that the refugee women and migrant women from Ukraine, but not only, joined together and make their own conference, and they still, even the results of this conference are now implemented in, even it was more than a year ago, 1.5 years. And this picture down there is something we need to do, is to keep supporting Ukraine. This is we have in our coordination support center place where Ukrainian refugees, again a initiative from them, create camouflage nets, which are very important now to we are very proud because they protect patriots in Ukraine. And we understand that whatever achievement we can have is only when basically Ukraine will stand and will be will prevail, will be victorious in this war. So thank you so much. Slava Ukraini.
Thank you, Mr. Hebanovsky. As president of the Ina Psheshin Foundation, you gave us a lot of information and also recommendations. Let me also clarify one thing. It's not the European Union flag, it's the Council of Europe flag.
Yeah, I said
That's
that you donated it.
No, we gave them. our flag.
I just
Okay.
I tried to say it
Okay,
clearly
I
that
understood.
that was your contribution for the identity of is also of European Union.
Thank you. Thank you. It was important to clarify. Mr. Vasyl Lutsyk, I don't know if you want to move in front or speak from your seat as you wish. Mr. Vasyl Lutsyk is the head of the National Social Service of Ukraine, and I understand you will speak to us about some legal issues concerning the status of Ukrainian children and also institutional care problems. So maybe you come next to Mr. Lubinets.
No, it's no problem.
Thank you very much for being with us. You have the floor, Mr. Lutsyk.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you for opportunity to share our experience of international cooperation in sphere of children rights protection. I will continue in Ukrainian. Please use your headphones. В першу чергу я хочу подякувати всім країнам.
Let me first of all express my gratitude to all the countries which welcome our children since the beginning of the war, because your support was highly important right from the start. And thank you for helping us protect our children and learn new practices as well. We have the National Social Service of Ukraine. It is an entity charged with the respect of the Hague Convention, and we are also in charge of following the well-being of Ukrainian children. So the question is the following: our children, are they refugees according to the Hague Convention? Now, we did discuss this issue, and according to us, our children cannot be considered as refugees because they benefited from the temporary protection granted by the European Union, and because the children refugees actually fled their country because of a threat on their country, but where our countries had to flee their country, our children had to flee their country because of an external threat, a threat coming from outside. So once this threat will be dispelled, our children will be able to come back to their country. So I think it's important really to understand the status of our children, and we are grateful to the countries who actually granted temporary protection to our children, which shows that they actually understand very well what is the status of the Ukrainian children living in their countries. We recognize the importance of the temporary protection directive. The rights of the children need to be respected, and their needs must be fulfilled. According to the convention, the status of the protected children must be respected and recognized by all the parties signatories of the convention. Now, we have taken the necessary steps to deinstitutionalize the care of orphan children. Now, it's very important here to understand who we're talking about. We have the Ukrainian legislation and on the rights of orphans, and the guardian of the orphans actually represent the rights of the children, and the guardians are in charge of all the procedures that need to be made on behalf of the child. But it's important to make sure that the children living abroad have access to all the necessary information. But, sometimes the children are sent abroad, but the guardians stayed in Ukraine. In such a case, the guardians do not have access to all the necessary information. We would like to create a mechanism, a cooperation mechanism, to enable the exchange of information on children that left the country, because according to our legislation, the National Social Service in charge of social protection can obtain this information to protect the best interest of the child. So there are existing mechanisms that help us already exchange some information on the children that are put in foster families abroad, just to make sure that their rights are respected. Now, the situations can vary a lot. Some Ukrainians immigrated, went abroad, and in some cases, these Ukrainians do not necessarily know what the national legislation of their host country is. So we actually need to find a way to make sure that the Ukrainian families leaving Ukraine know what are the opportunities for them, what the Ukrainian children have access to. They need to how to make sure that they know more about the national legislation of the host country. For example, in Norway, the situation is completely different compared to that in Ukraine. So it's really important to make sure that Ukrainian families and those representing Ukrainian children understand the legal specificities of the host countries. Some decisions were taken by courts in Ukraine. And according to these decisions, well, thanks to these decisions, the parents, well, there can be a real exchange of information between the parents, who are sometimes separated, and the children, while maintaining parental authority. And there's one more thing I'd like to tell you. Despite the war, Ukraine is really doing its utmost to reunite the children with the host families. The objective being the adoption of these children. Now, adoption is temporarily suspended, And I believe this is something we need to work on together, because we're really confronted with an unprecedented challenge when it comes to adoption. There are international rules that apply to adoption, but we're talking here about adoption by Ukrainian families, and this is something we need to insist on. Countries really need to uphold the best interest of the Ukrainian children who had to leave their country. The other countries really need to apply international rules.
Lutsyk, you put the finger to some really difficult issues, and I don't know if we have the answers, but I think now the time is to open the floor to members again, to collect some questions and comments. Please, if I may ask you, since we have another speaker before we close in an hour, and she will be connected online, if I can ask you to make questions and comments and no longer statements or speeches. Mr. Pisco, may I start with you? You've been rapporteur on the issue. I give you the floor.
Thank you so much to all the colleagues, to all those that are here present to make this discussion, this very important discussion. Thank you very much for all the information that you brought to us in those different domains. And I think it's very positive that you have this insight concerning what is being done. We have here, we heard about some good practices in those domains, the education, in healthcare, in mental health, and there are a lot of other issues that must be tackled. When we are hearing what you're saying, we have all the impression that there is a very good positive idea about what has been done with the effort of all countries, and I think that the Council of Europe is doing a great job, probably an unreplaceable job in tackling this issue, and I think that is something that we must recognize. My question is that in spite of all those things that you said, we still need to know, because there is a lot of challenge and we are aware about that in all those domains, either concerning Ukraine, either in the countries where the Ukrainian people are living now, either in the relation with Russia and the Russian Federation, because namely because of the deported and forcibly displaced children. My question is, on the other side, could you tell us about the dimension, about the things that we need to be done in all domains, in all those domains? Because I believe that in spite of the good practices and the good examples in mental health, in healthcare, there still are a lot of things to do. And could we have a picture about the things that are being need to be done? Because if we have it, I'm sure that also we could stress also the lines and the orientations to our countries, to the Council of Europe, to the institutions, to the European Union, to have concrete measures to go further in support Ukraine and all these huge and unbelievable challenges that we face because of the war. This is my question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Pisco. Monsieur Moutquin. Simon, vous avez la parole.
You have the floor, Simon. Well, thank you very much. I'd like to come back to the issue of the integration of Ukrainian refugees. But before that, I'd like to say there are two migratory models. We're not going to have a debate on that today, but there is the one centered on security issues, meaning screening all those asking for asylum, which is expensive, and it also takes time and takes a toll on the mental well-being, and the other one based on the free movement. And for the first time, the temporary protection directive was used. It was actually adopted in 1980, I believe, but it was used for the first time for Ukrainians. And that was a very good thing, because what was said, well, Ukrainians were able to find housing, to find work and all, and it worked very well. And it showed to everyone that free movement actually works. That's what I wanted to say. But there are limits, in particular when it comes to education, because we do see that during the first month, hoped that Ukrainian children would be able to go back home quickly. But we see that this war is going on. So we have to find ways of being flexible. Flexibility is important because children have to maintain strong cultural links with their own country and integrate in the long term. So what about twinning programs? The training programs between European Union schools and Ukrainian schools. How about organizing, stays in Ukraine, helping Ukrainian children to get out of the country for a few months for a brief respite? Maybe we could think about that. And we could also think about other forms of flexibility, culture, friends, family. I think we really need to work on that. And what about the future? Temporary protection needs to be renewed on a regular basis. So it's not a situation of stability. So how can we, and I'm happy that the negotiation procedure has started, but we know it will take a few years. So we really need to think about the renewal of the temporary protection. We need to find long-term solutions. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Simon. Mrs. Beloze, you have the floor.
Thank you. Colleagues, I would like to talk about the education, and I want to stress when Mr. Babak was having his speech, he was talking more about preserving this Ukrainian identity, and it's normal that Ukrainians want their children to preserve this and to keep connection with the country. And when we told Hibanovsky speech, the first was integration, and your answer was very good, that strong identity, it's when better integration. And we have to understand this in the Ukrainian side and European side, the countries of Council of Europe, that actually it's hard for children, but it's normal when they are very well integrated. It takes 1-2 years to learn language. And for example, in Strasbourg, my children have 5 French a day additionally, and they are still being integrated, and it's very important. And Ukraine made a great work when we adopted the first days of the war, the family teaching. It means that parents are responsible, and my children also go to Ukrainian school, and they have this test every semester. I think this is the best practice, and we have to keep to this, because it's more important children to be integrated. And then I think after these 2 years, we have to help to create the schools, the weekend schools and so on. So I think this another way in Ukraine that it's also 5 schools in each region. We have 24 regions, that you have this, you're taking into account subject and marks from European schools. And then you have to but they are not incompatible. So I think the best way is the learning test each semester to keep the connection. And of course, I must tell you, I'm very grateful to European school, but the teacher of my child didn't know that she is under guardianship without a mother. She's already half-year teaching. She was very happy with the child, but she didn't know even that the situation in Kyiv is very severe. So raising the awareness even of European teachers to understand in what situation our children are. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Larissa. Mrs. Kravchuk, Evgenia.
Yes, I'd like to touch this time the educational part, and I really thank to Serhiy Babak for his very concrete proposals. I think one will be doing the resolution for the debates and drafting, we could use actually as recommendations in this resolution part to member states about concrete steps. I want to also comment on this keeping the identity part. I totally agree that the kids should go to schools or other networks, so that could be integrated in the society. But there are ways to keep the identity and help to preserve the identity, because I mean we'll be speaking the next session about erasing identity of kids that are deported to Ukraine. So for sure, from Ukraine to Russia, for sure we have to ask the member states to help to preserve identity, not to lose it in normal conditions. And there are ways to do it. For example, schools can hire Ukrainian teachers that are seeking the shelter in other countries, and it will be part of the also the guidance. There are different forms. By the way, I thank to Poland totally, and just in Warsaw, I think at least 3 schools there are with Ukrainian subjects, and one just opened, I don't know, like a few months ago. And by the way, it's financed by donors, by private money. So we have to make sure that maybe at least municipalities help with the premises, because usually renting such a big premises for schooling takes a lot of money. So maybe if we could find cooperation with the level of government or municipalities who's giving the space, then it will be easier to maintain that. And another thing that I wanted to stress out, I touched upon it a little bit, is the school books in Europe. In Italy in 2021 was huge scandal with a school book on geography where part of Ukraine was written as Russia. That was official school book that was in schools. 2021, Crimea marked as Russia, and actually the whole region, it was Moldova, Ukraine, and Russia, was called the Russian territories. So I mean, we have to make sure that there is a right perception of Ukraine, because Ukraine had been in shadows of Russia, Russian Empire, USSR, then Russian Federation for years and years. And what Serhiy mentioned about Ukrainian studies is crucial. And also it's crucial to have it in higher education, because everywhere not in Europe, in the world, you would have Russian studies in universities. Now at least we have to expand it to Eastern European studies, and in some universities actually to have Ukrainian studies, because that's the way to show what is Ukraine, that it had been Europe for centuries, for more than thousands of years, and Moscow didn't exist at that time. Thank you.
Thank you, Evgenia. I still have on the list Mr. Paulo Pisco, Madame Nickel, Madame Clapeau, Mr. Rousopoulos, Mr. Griffith, yes, Madame Mezentseva, and you also, Madame Deputy Minister. Who else? And at the end, yes, our chair. So, Mr. Sushko, you have the floor.
Thank you, dear colleagues, for discussion this important topic. I will continue speaking Ukrainian. Дуже важлива тема, і
This topic is highly important. My Ukrainian colleagues and I contribute to the Coordination Center for the Protection of Children. This center actually manages on a daily basis all these operational challenges. We really try to analyze all the challenges on a case-by-case basis. And I'd like to come back to what Mr. Babak said about education. I'd like to give you the example of Kharkiv. During the COVID pandemic, children had to do some remote learning, to resort to remote sensing. Today is the same thing, where when they're at home or in shelters, they need to connect. But most often they don't have the equipment to connect to remote education, and the parents need to stay with the children to make sure that they study. So these conditions are not good. And I like to confirm what Mr. Babak said about the shelters. These shelters need to be properly equipped and reinforced, and the shelters today are just not sufficient. Now, concerning the equipment and the tools needed to connect to remote education, we indeed have links with twin cities, and if there are old tablets or old laptops of even old buses, maybe these pieces of equipment have been used and can be given to Ukrainian cities. That would be a huge help for us. And we also have children with difficulties. For example, they're disabled or they're visually impaired or hearing impaired, and they have specific needs. Now, coming back to the issue of the status, I do agree with Mr. Lutsyk. I too believe there are Ukrainian children should not be considered as refugees, because that's a very specific status. And it all depends on the laws in the host country.
The child is excluded from his or her family, and the parents are not searched for. And so if the child is placed in a foster family or in an institution, the mother can't go and fetch her child. And so that's a problem. So I would kindly request member states to look carefully at the status granted to Ukrainian children. The terminology is very important because there are implications. Another issue is that some countries do not recognize the identity documents delivered by Ukrainian authorities, documents of any kind, such as guardianship documents. There's very specific paperwork. We have specific institutions for guardianship, whereas in some European countries, it is the courts that oversee the guardianship system. And if a country, host country, does not recognize, does not accept the Ukrainian paperwork, the child in question is therefore outside of the guardianship system, temporary guardianship system. And there are children that have been accepted into foreign families. They've gotten used to living with the families, but they don't have the same rights as if they were the children belonging to that family, so they don't have access to a number of provisions. And so we'd like to ask countries to look at the status of children very closely. We're very grateful for everything that has been done so far. We would just kindly request countries to look into the status of children and inform the relevant authorities should they have information about Ukrainian children being in the country and see their status change. You have some people who may be abroad, but there may be there may be tracing efforts for them undertaken in Ukraine.
Nickel. Miroslav.
Yes,
Miroslava,
thank you.
Please, you can take it.
Mr. Woman, dear colleagues, the country which I represent, Poland, was the country which accepted many millions of Ukrainian refugees, including children, after the criminal Russian invasion of Ukraine began. As of October 2023, 957,000 of Ukrainian refugees still remain in Poland. We welcome them with open hands, accept them in our homes, and we help as much as we could. This also includes children, which were accepted into Polish schools almost immediately. The new Polish government Donald Tusk, which was sworn in earlier this week refused that will push for continued support for Ukraine, both humanitarian and military. I'm very happy that the president of Inna Przestrzeń Foundation from Poland is here with us today and can share his and other NGOs' perspective on the access to education for Ukraine children who are currently in Council of Europe member states. I have a fundamental question from our lawmakers' perspective. What legal mechanism of member states and the European Union as a whole can be implemented to ensure that access to education of Ukraine children is more widespread and doesn't require a lot of bureaucracy from the parents or legal guardians of those children? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Madame Mireille Clapeau, vous avez la parole.
Merci. Thank you very much. Thank you very much also to the different chairs of the committees and the parliamentarians present here today, as well as the speakers. I have a question about gender. Do you think it's important to treat women and girls differently in terms of education and differently in order to restore equality of rights for girls and young women to education, to their different rights also in terms of health, reproductive health? And I'm also thinking of the representation of women and girls in political fora. If we want these women and girls to return to Ukraine and participate in the country's future political life and in the reconstruction of the country, it's very important for these women and girls to be informed of their rights and actively exercise their political rights as well. Thank you very much, Mireille.
Griffiths, please.
Thank you. Thank you indeed, Madam Chair. I've heard so many facts and so many figures, so many analyses in this, I think, very, very important debate and day in committee, that I'm hoping very much that the skills of our Secretariat will be able to bring and synthesize all of this in a way that we can manage once we've gone home. I'm a fairly simple-minded person. I've enjoyed all the speeches, but it's holding them in a coordinated and coherent way that I have found troubling. Not troubling, but demanding. For me, my entire, apart from the Parliament, I mean, the British Parliament at the moment is in complete chaos on everything relating to everything. And we are looking forward very much, George and I, to a change of government when you'll find a different tone in these debates. But for all of that, my practical experience of all of this is at a very local and humble level. Another member of the House of Lords lives very close to the village where I was born. And when I go home, I like to stay with him. He's a widower, he has a nice home, and he has a room he keeps for me. But he's now not able to give it to me any longer. I have to stay in a hotel. because he has a mother and 3 Ukrainian children filling up his house. He has one little corner he keeps for himself. In that village that he lives in, there are 14 families that are accommodating Ukrainian refugees. Well, let's not call them refugees, let's call them visitors and guests. And one of the great things about that is that there are occasions when all of them, they're a group of about 30 or more, can get together to maintain a spirit of being Ukraine and their culture and their identity. But we notice from the 3 children in the house that I'd like to be staying in, but where now I have to pay very expensive hotel bills, we notice that the 2 younger children are integrated in the child care facilities of the little village. One is very small and goes to a preschool sort of thing. The other is young and goes to a primary school. But the 14-year-old has all kinds of difficulties. He has the fact that he's 14 for a start. Any 14-year-old has difficulties anywhere. But layer on top of that the fact that he feels his distance from home, his isolation from home, and you've got something that is very complicated. And we're living at times when, because of the economic circumstances, municipalities don't have resource to direct towards the facilities that some have been mentioning. It is not an easy time. But I try to see these fine statements and declaration of needs against, as a backdrop to the on-the-ground, day-by-day struggle to maintain humane relationships, integrated communities, and to help Ukrainians in these little places to realize that they are valued and that their country's future matters a great deal, even to the people of the tiny village where these people are living. And that has to be kept as well as the large picture.
Thank you, Lord Griffiths. I can assure you that the meeting is not only video streamed, but also recorded. So your efficient secretariat will make sure that everything will be taken note in. And this is exactly the idea. It's impossible today to conclude or to even register very well in our minds everything we hear. But that's why I hope we will have the debate in January that we decided yesterday. Mrs. Mezentseva, Chair of the Ukrainian delegation and Chair of the Committee on Equality and Non-Discrimination, followed by Mr. Roussopoulos, and our Chair to conclude this discussion, Ms. Olena Khomenko, will follow. Madam Mezentseva, you have.
Thank you, dear Despina. Such a big honor of being a part of something we have planned in a very short time, and considering that there are so many other speakers on the list. Friends, I would want just to share one important project that every one of you has referred to this or other way, and it's very practical. And these are the tablets and laptops which we're delivering to children who faced deportations and got back home, who were under occupation and were released, who moved to other places and countries. So with different partners, private companies, governments, private entities, anonymous organizations who, would want to remain let's say, not very public about that, but they still do it. We have delivered already more than 4,000 or 5,000, I'm not sure, specifically for the Kharkiv region. If you would want to join, please address us directly, the members of the Ukrainian delegation or secretariat, and we will move on. We are delivering now extra 600. And one thing which is essential, I really don't want the children to have such dreams when they say, today, this and that person fulfilled my dream of having a laptop. I want that these dreams would be the least what Ukrainian children are dreaming of. So their dreams would be big. And thank you for contributing for their safety and long-lasting learning skills, which Mr. Babak referred to. Last but not least, let's avoid indeed using the refugee word. Yeah, temporarily relocated children, temporarily relocated persons, and that's yet again something PACE contributed, the international law, new notion to be at place. Thank you very much to all.
Thank you, Maria. Mr. Theodoros Rousopoulos, you have the floor.
Maria is totally right while talking about how we should refer to these children. Why did I ask for the floor again? It is my academic idea about the ethnic identity. I have been working for long, and my work as an academic is ethnic identity. And please don't let me be misunderstood. When I'm talking about ethnic identity, we're not speaking extremist. It is, let's say, ethnical identity. Ethnic identity has three elements. The first is the language. The second is the rituals. And the third, in many, many countries, in many people, is religious. Now, we were talking about integration. Integration is something good. It is welcomed. But on the other hand, we must remember that we must never allow someone to change the ethnic identity. So the language is there and is the first element that these children should be always learn their language. And integration is well because we must not receive the children as intruders. They may be foreigners, but they're not intruders. But on the other hand, please have in your mind, we must never allow all these children and other children who are facing the same situation to forget their ethnic identity and especially their language. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rousopoulos. And our chairperson, Mrs. Olena Khomenko. We are so grateful to you, Olena, for chairing this and all the energy you put in organizing it together with your colleagues.
Thank you, Despina. Thank you, colleagues. I just would like to inform that in the Parliament of Ukraine, there is a draft law registered. It will be considered and will be voted by the Parliament on registration of persons whose lives and health were harmed as a result of the armed aggression of the Russian Federation against Ukraine. So the creation of this state register of victims of Russian Federation aggression will ensure the, let's say, repatriation for harms that was caused during deportation or forced relocation, also for mental illnesses as a result of psychological injuries, loss of access to healthcare services and treatment, and loss of access to educational services, physical suffering, emotional stress, discomfort. So I just listed some of the reasons, some of the causes, cases which this register should cover. And it is very important for the Council of Europe as the leader in establishment of the register, also to take into account these kind of damages. So not only damages to infrastructure but also to health and lives. Dear colleagues, now we have our moderator to close this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Olena. It is my pleasure now to give the floor to Mrs. Anna Schmidt, a policy officer from the European Commission, DG Migration and Home Affairs, who will update us on the temporary protection for those fleeing Russia's war aggression against Ukraine 1 year on. And of course, it's very important that we have this discussion the day that we all celebrate the start of negotiation accessions for Ukraine to the European Union. Mrs. Smith, you have the floor for some minutes, and then members can raise some questions to you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. I'm getting an echo, but wait, maybe this will sort it.
We hear you very well.
Okay, I think I have to turn my audio off, so I won't hear you, but I will turn that off the moment I turn that on again the moment I'm done. So thank you very much. I am so sorry I can't be with you in person. We have mission budget constraints at the end of the year, So this is why it's very prosaic. And as you just said, it's a special moment. Obviously, we're all very relieved and very happy. And I think this is also the start of a new relationship with Ukraine, already so much closer since the Russian aggression. But I think we are entering now a new phase that will show us many more things. I was very glad I listened to everything that happened before, so I'm going to try to not duplicate some things that were already said. And I'll just provide you with a general overview and then happy to take any questions. So I think, as you're already aware, the EU, again, another historic decision, activated the Temporary Protection Directive very, very immediately after the beginning of the war in Ukraine, after the Russian invasion. And we currently provide temporary protection to some 4.2 million officially registered Ukrainians across the EU member states, with about half of them in Germany and Poland. And then among that, it was already said, 1/3 of those are children. So we have a rough calculation that 1/5 of the children that lived in Ukraine before the war now live in the EU. That is a very rough calculation. It was already said, some of these status, but that is the minimum we are talking about. And obviously, that is a huge responsibility. And that has put child protection very much at the fore of the EU response more broadly. When I talk about the Temporary Protection Directive, just very, very briefly, it's a special immediate form of protection that is delimited in time, temporary. And one of the two big issues around that and for the activation was basically to reduce the administrative burden on the member states and on the people concerned to access protection, and also provide immediate access to rights. So this is the right of residence. This is the access to employment in the labor markets. This is access to accommodation, basic social assistance and means of subsistence if the people in question cannot provide for themselves. It's emergency medical care, and for children specifically, Article 16, the right to guardianship in case there is no guardian with the children, right? And there's a whole provision on that to ensure the legal guardianship and care of children. So maybe also just to say, in terms of the profile, the needs of the protection needs of the children fleeing from Ukraine, we saw very quickly was different from sort of the traditional refugee flows that we have seen also in the context of the Syrian war. So of the large number of children arriving in Ukraine, few were registered really as unaccompanied or separate children within the meaning of EU law. So we have this phenomenon of the separated children who may not arrive with their parents, but they arrive with guardians or other adults who are charged to take care of them. And we also have the specific situation that was already mentioned of children who were evacuated from Ukrainian institutions. Officially, I think the data that we have is around 5,600 who come in groups and often with their guardians, right? Their institutional guardians. These are often, sometimes disabled children with disabilities, so very particularly vulnerable. In response, I already said the legal framework is the Temporary Protection Directive, which is a directive, which means that it's not directly applicable in the member states, but that member states have their own legislation to give meaning to the directive. So there's some variation, and in order to coordinate this response, we set up the so-called Solidarity Platform, which has been key in sort of organizing and coordinating and harmonizing the EU response across the member states. Includes all the member states, also other partners, UNHCR amongst them, UNICEF. We have very close cooperation, but also the Ukrainian authorities. And we have sort of different formats of that. There's subgroups, also specifically on children. We have specific meetings, and we also have regular meetings. We just recently had one with the Ukrainian authorities specifically, so with the consulate officers of the who sit in the different member states to address the concerns directly. So I think one of the things that we have learned is that these partnerships have been absolutely essential, be them with civil society, with the international organizations, etc. We issued, so that's the coordination part, the legal part. Then in terms of guidance and common frameworks, we very quickly issued a number of operative guidelines on the implementation of Temporary Protection Directive, specifically guidance on how to access education, a frequently asked question document on the specific challenges related to the reception and care of children fleeing from Ukraine, and that includes also, for instance, guidance on the recognition of guardianship decisions, with a reminder that Ukraine and the member states apply the 96 Hague Child Protection Convention, and therefore there is mutual recognition of guardianship decisions. So maybe just to say that, because that also came up. I invite everybody to have a look at our relevant websites on that and to look at these documents. A number of the issues that came up here are taken up in that, and I'll come back to some of the issues on education a little bit later. And also just to say that in March last year, we issued a Commission communication on 1-year temporary protection, which you can also find very easily, 1 year on Temporary Protection Directive European Union, which gives a bit of a review of the measures and actions taken in the relevant areas. And there's quite a long section also on children, which recaps a lot of what I'm saying here. So maybe in the first instance, the first issue of protection was this issue of recognition of documents, proper registration of children, how to ensure recognition of medical and disability certificates, education certification and diplomas. That's an ongoing issue, but that was a very immediate thing. And that obviously has a direct impact on the lives of children. And it was said here in the meeting a number of times, the information around that is also critical. So a lot of effort was put on information. We work very closely with the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, who also sometimes do surveys across the Ukrainians in Europe. And in our understanding, the information grosso modo has worked quite well. So there's some satisfaction with that. But of course, this is an ongoing issue. I talked a little bit about recognition of guardianship, basically just to also say, because it came up in terms of how to work with Ukrainian authorities and Ukrainian parents and legal guardians to trace missing children. We've had a number of dialogues around this, and we basically have to work on the basis of the EU data protection legislation and the rights of the children and their representation. So this is a conversation that is framed by that. And that is ongoing, and I think there's quite a close collaboration and conversation on this. In terms of guardianships, that has changed a little bit over time. When initially this was a lot about the recognition, we now have some issues about changes of guardianship arrangements. So whether that is about issues related to, for instance, it could be divorce, it could be about custody arrangements between separated families. We are all aware there is a lot of these issues going on. Sometimes that is just about facilitating administrative steps. Sometimes there are broader issues behind that. This is really an issue for the courts in the different member states. So the sort of the governance, we try to sort of facilitate the information exchange on these issues, but these are legal matters where we don't meddle in principle. And then one of the ongoing challenges that we obviously have, which is about this issue of connecting, and I think this was also mentioned before, connecting children and their families to the support they can get across in the member states. So this is about national child protection services. This is also about extra support in education system, etc. So we understand this is an ongoing challenge. And what we try to do at the level of the EU is to keep that conversation going, to sort of exchange best practices across member states and do what we can do and at the level of the responsibility in the sphere of responsibility of the European Commission. Um, I wanted to briefly say something about this issue of deinstitutionalization in relation to children who arrived from Ukrainian institutions as groups, because that has been quite a challenge, which is to ensure quality accommodation and care in line with the European standards on deinstitutionalized care for the groups evacuated from Ukrainian institutions. I said it was around 5,000, 5,600, around 1,500. Again, numbers always differ, hosted in Poland today. So we have been working very closely with the Ukrainian authority on this also to identify solutions. And there is a pilot project going on in Ukraine where we're working with UNICEF, Poland, and the Ukrainian authorities on how to decongest a little bit some of these broader groups. And it links actually to something that is also being discussed in the context of the enlargement report on Ukraine and the future accession of Ukraine, which is childcare from in Ukraine, where we have worked. And we support that also inside Ukraine. So there are some of these interconnections. On education, now one thing I wanted to say maybe briefly, just before I forget, because this number was mentioned about the Polish issue on guardianship. And maybe just to say, because it was quite a high number, like 35,000. And in my understanding, and we have also communicated, this number was communicated to us, this is about decisions on guardianship, which is slightly different than the transfer of guardianship. It is also about the recognition of guardianship arrangements by the member states. So not necessarily a shift, but we can discuss this maybe on the side, because this issue of the mutual recognition of guardianship arrangement is an ongoing one, as I said. On education, I think the biggest challenge has been enrollment and to also understand what kind of education arrangements children are in at the moment and whether they're actually learning, right? It's one thing to be registered in a local school. It's another to actually attend and be able to follow the classes. It's one thing to be doing online learning, but it is very important to also know what that does in terms of learning outcomes. So this is one of the things I said before. Temporary Protection Directive provides for immediate access into state education systems at primary and secondary level. What we have done at EU level on this is, again, issuing policy guidance to try to promote peer learning across the EU. So different member states have done different things, whether it is the employment of Ukrainian assistant teachers, whether it is about actually trying to facilitate the access of qualified Ukrainian teachers into their national systems, whether it is about dual learning, trying to combine the learning that takes place still online via the Ukrainian curricula with the curricula in that given member state without overburdening the child and sort of providing too many responsibilities. So there's quite an exchange going on this. Again, I invite you to have a look. I'll mention some of the documents in a second. We think that on average, about half of the displaced children from Ukraine were enrolled in schools in 22-23. That leaves a huge number of those who are really at risk of not being in school or are not in school. And this, maybe to just say, is on the basis of pre-existing issues related to disrupted schooling based on the COVID pandemic. So there's really an issue here of, especially in the upper years, we have less enrollment in the higher teenage years, obviously for reasons that they really want to continue and finalize their educational cycle. But there's a problem. We know that language learning is absolutely critical. Just to say, on 30th of June 22, we published a practical manual with considerations, key principles, and practices on the inclusion of displaced children. So that is something maybe important to say. Last summer, in June 23, the European Commission and the Ministry of Education and Science in Ukraine signed an arrangement for cooperation on education that is being followed up. There's a standing invitation to Ukraine to participate in peer learning activities under the European Education Area Strategic Framework. There is a focus on the mutual recognition of academic qualifications participation in the e-twinning and Eurydice networks. So these are sort of specific education networks for EU member states that Ukraine has been invited to. And we continue to very much encourage the enrollment in host country schools as a sort of measure of inclusion and of learning. I believe there's a recent ministerial order by the Ukrainian government to provide guidance to Ukrainian schools on how to assess learning outcomes of school attendance abroad upon return, which is also very important. And really, it is about this mutual recognition. Some of our member states are further along there. Some of them are still learning. So this is something. The quality assessment, I think, of what that actually means is an ongoing problem. It's very difficult to assess. I talked about the links to the Ukrainian curriculum where possible. We have identified some of that. Maybe just to say one of the big issues, and I know I'm tilting too much on education, which was just one panel we had, but it's been sort of really at the core of so much that is about child well-being for us, is basic infrastructure issues. We are now seeing in many, many countries, Germany, my home country, issues of space and of staff for learning, etc. So this becomes very practical, and that leads me to the last issue that is an essential part of what the EU has been doing on accommodating Ukrainian children across the member states, which is basic financial support. Very pragmatic, and that is significant financial assistance to EU member states to address some of the issues, including through the Asylum Migration Integration Fund. And just to say that we recently had a special call there for 7 million for member states under pressure to work on the reception of children, and specifically unaccompanied children, including separated children arriving from Ukraine. And we've also had a very special call specifically targeted at some of the member states on the border, over 15 million, again, about the reception systems there. I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to answer any question. It's a very broad area, but I just try to focus on some of the things that might be relevant to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Schmidt. I think you answered to many questions we had. We have time just to take one or two maximum questions. If any member wishes to take the floor, but I understand that you gave answers rather than provoking questions with your statement, and I thank you very much for that. So I think that with Mrs. Schmidt's intervention, we come to the closure of the morning session. I would like to thank very warmly our panelists, Maryna, Line, Sergei, Vasyl, Vidor, and Ioana, and thank all the members who have been so active and patient through a long morning. A very big thanks to our chair, the secretary of two committees who worked together for this event. It's of course very difficult to draw any conclusions after 3 hours and a half of discussion. I would say that we heard the facts and the challenges, and we got quite clear messages about what to do. When it comes to access to healthcare, I would in particularly notice the urgent need for rehabilitation centers to support both physical and psychological rehabilitation of children. Myself being the mother of an amputee child, I heard very careful the need for prosthetic limbs, and I was informed in the meantime that the doctor, the French doctor who takes care of my son, was in Ukraine this summer to do this. So we will mobilize efforts, and I think we can use our Women at Pace platform again to mobilize simple things like that. I'm sure we can mobilize also prosthetic limbs. Now, we, of course, spoke a lot about education, and I think this is essential because language and education are linked to identity, national identity. And I think this is a very clear message. We have to preserve the Ukrainian identity for these children who are struggling in schools to follow lessons in a language they hardly understand. We also saw the link between education, schooling, issues and mental health of Ukrainian children, how this affects their trauma, how education can be used to actually improve their psychological situation if we make maybe additional efforts. We also heard about cyberbullying in schools. I understand this is not a problem only for Ukrainian children, but maybe they are more sensible. Now, I understand that education remains the top priority for Ukraine, the second top priority after defense, at least for children abroad. We also understood that there is the specific challenge of ensuring the enrollment of Ukrainian children to Ukraine when they leave the countries they are temporarily in. And we understand that it is very important to ensure this enrollment, including distant learning. Now, to urgent also that Ukrainian curriculum is integrated in the curriculum of Ukrainian children studying at schools. And we also heard that digital solutions have to be encouraged to improve quality education, although we also understand that digital solutions cannot replace physical presence and context that are so essential for the well-being of children. Now, I think our panelists gave very concrete list of needs. We heard about building bomb shelters also, and we understand that this is very concrete and necessary. And I think we will try to list all the needs, and even independently of our political debate, we can distribute the list of needs to all of you so that this list goes through national parliaments. And it would be grateful if we mobilize, as we did at the very first beginning of the war, when we made sure that women at PACE are equipped to defend themselves with special gilet, that we can now mobilize more intensively to reply to the needs of Ukrainian children. Thank you very much again, Madam Chair. Thank you so much, dear Olena. Good luck for your afternoon sessions with even more, I think, complex and sensitive issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Despina, and I thank you all participants, and I would like to ask you to come back for the meeting, for this meeting room at 2 p.m. sharp, and we will start the second part of our public meeting dedicated to deported children. And we have a present to you, Ms. Secretary General, and to you, Mr. President, and to our great friend Zanda, who put so much efforts into helping us with the issues of Ukrainian children. These are 3 paintings of Ukrainian children, 3 drawings, those who were injured during this war, and they were having treatment in Ahmadid hospital. So, please.
Sorry.
Thank you so much.
I wasn't firing you.
There are no other people's children than.
This is a little present, but very important.
Thank you.
It's part of children's dream from Ukraine. Saved with this.
Thanks so much.
President, come so that we can see in the online. You have to
beautiful
come
pictures,
forward.
yes.
Do you?
Maybe you can come closer.
We have to come more in the center so that those who are watching on us online can also see. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So, now the
We finished on time, even it's nice to meet you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. I hope this will be helpful, but I think the afternoon will be very useful. Informative. Yes. Yes. Yes.